I'm Dr. John Kruse, and today I'm going to be talking about the confusion between narcissism and ADHD. Take-home message is that both narcissistic personality disorder and ADHD are linked together more closely than we expect by just random chance. So it does seem that childhood ADHD is a driving factor or increases the likelihood that as an adult you will show diagnostic criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. Clearly, the majority of people with ADHD are not narcissists, but a disproportionate number do seem to fit that. There's a host of probably biological, psychological, and social factors explaining why these seem to be fairly strongly linked. But another part, and maybe this is part of the social aspect that's going on right now in our culture, we are, I believe, wildly overdiagnosing narcissistic personality disorder. And one of the reasons is that there is a considerable overlap and confusion between ADHD symptoms and narcissistic symptoms. And we'll be getting into ways to try to separate out the two. But even in people where there isn't any ADHD, we are clearly overdiagnosing narcissism. Personality disorders have been defined as pervasive, so they are ongoing patterns of dysfunctional, inflexible, so they are not particularly susceptible to readily changing or easy change. So dysfunction in both thoughts, thinking patterns, and behaviors, interactions with others, and are persisting throughout the lifetime. Traditionally, we don't diagnose these until adulthood, 18 or over, because you need, again, a pervasive pattern. And that these behaviors or patterns are out of sync with your own culture. Fortunately or unfortunately, many of these are what we call egosyntonic. And that's a fancy word for it's working for you, but it might not work for everyone around you. So many people with personality disorders don't think, I don't have a problem. It's all those people who are jerks or stupid or dangerous or lying or whatever the issue for your particular personality disorder. So the old and oldest, going back 50, 60 years, formulation was that we had some conditions like schizophrenia, ADHD, depression, and others, which had a biological, at least partial, origin. And traditionally, the personality disorders were thought to be more largely originating from psychological, and particularly in the psychoanalyst mind, mother-parent, mother-child interactions. There are probably a host of biological, psychological, and social forces all contributing to personality disorders. So increasingly, there do seem to be genetic components. So the schizophrenic-like personality disorders do seem to have some overlap with full-blown schizophrenia. Some of the other personality disorders seem to share some of the genes with other psychological, psychiatric problems in general. So there's biological factors going on there. Whether or not the rigid psychoanalytic origin stories of blaming the mother are completely true or not, clearly not completely true, but there is growing evidence that interactional patterns between parents and children in terms of strength of attachment and how the needs of a child are met or not met do contribute to, again, patterns of conceptualization of how the child sees themselves, how they see others, how they interact with those, which seem to be a factor in developing personality disorders. And there do seem to be social factors. So how your whole society moves, interacts, what we allow, what we value, how we express, how we allow it to be expressed. And if we go back far enough in time, most of the world lived in much more tribal communities where your identity was so firmly embedded in your belonging, your essence, your identification with your tribe rather than with yourself as an individual. So I'm forgetting the author's name, but came out of a few years ago called The Weird Society. So W is white, educated, industrialized. I'm forgetting R in democratic societies. Our modern culture, modern Western culture, and 90+% of our psychological studies, testing, verification have been done on an extremely, by historical and worldwide standards, psychologically strange population of people who value individuality, tie identity to personal success, downplay family relationships and connections, There's good aspects to that. So increased likelihood of valuing things like honesty and trusting strangers are one benefit, but there are detriments as well. Many of them probably contributing to increase in narcissistic behaviors. So narcissistic personality disorder has been, for the last several decades, clumped with what are called the cluster B personality disorders: narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and the histrionic. The central feature is overly dramatic and often hypochondriacal, so very theatrical. So the DSM-5 is our current version. Many people accuse it of being a Bible for diagnosing. We use it as a standard tool, but I would say it sees itself most of the time more as an atlas, collection of maps to try to sort out and understand things. It understands it's a work in progress. It understands it's not the last word. And it has some diagnostic utility. And by that, I mean, it does provide some coherent conditions like ADHD or depression, which have some internal coherence that help people understand or comprehend what they are dealing with or what others are dealing with. It has some useful predictive value for anticipating, why would we see with ADHD some inattentive behaviors and some impulsive behaviors, or some compulsive behaviors, which seem the antithesis of some of the inattentive, scattered, disorganized thought. Again, for each of our diagnoses at work, brings these things together in a somewhat coherent way, predict behavior, and providing ability to diagnose treatments that are going to be effective or identify what's not likely to be effective. So the bottom line with the personality disorders that in general, and this is a gross overt generalization, but I'll stick with it, medications haven't shown to be too helpful with any of the personality disorders, particularly that we're focusing today on narcissistic. So again, that's a useful treatment guide. Again, it's true with borderline personality disorder. The core elements don't seem responsive to our current medications, although if someone's depressed, if someone's psychotic within that, then our medications may help somewhat. So there are opposing approaches, which rather than viewing each personality disorder as a discrete condition and separate, and part of why that doesn't make sense is that people who have any personality disorder are extremely likely to have symptoms of other and often to meet criteria for another personality disorder. So there are other approaches that are gaining much more recognition and acceptance that are viewing personality disorders as a whole, as a more spectrum continuum, and it should be the degree of problematic behaviors, problematic views of self that we are looking more at rather than these classic labels. How do we define narcissistic personality disorder? Again, the framework is it's a pattern behavior. It's pervasive over time. It's inflexible, but the core, what is the descriptive quality of narcissistic personality disorder is you need at least five of 9 different criteria, and 3 are particularly salient. They're often used to encapsulate narcissism. 1 is a grandiose sense of importance. So you have an overly inflated, overly positive view of how wonderful, smart, sexy, athletic, perfect you are. A need for excessive admiration. So there's some people who think they're really smart, really hot, but they don't need everyone to be telling them that all the time. But a need for people recognizing your greatness is a part of narcissism. And number 3 is a lack of empathy towards others. You want and expect and anticipate adulation, respect, admiration from others, but you're not really treating others with much respect, compassion, or individuality. So those are, again, our 3. You don't need to have those 3 specifically, but those are often cited as the 3 sort of core elements of the 5 you might need of the remaining 6 criteria. Number 4 is you have fantasies of unlimited either power or brilliance or beauty or love that you spend time thinking about, again, how wonderful you might be in each or in all of these ways, depending on who you are. Number 5, you feel that you are special and unique. And again, you can see here how social factors, there are much in modern society teaching us. And I believe each of us are unique, but we are also so alike. to one another. And that conundrum, how we resolve that is a big issue in mental health and cultural health in this world, or how we fail to solve that. But core part of narcissism is, again, feeling that you are especially unique and that you can only really be understood by others who are particularly brilliant, particularly special, particularly unique individuals themselves. Number 6 is a sense of entitlement. So not only are you that great and wonderful, but you deserve things because of that. You deserve special privileges. You can break certain laws. You don't have to follow the rules. Hey, you can take any documents you want from the White House because those rules that describe how you deal, well, other people break them all the time anyway. And even if the government asks for them back repeatedly and nicely, lying about whether you have them, that's not really wrong. You're great. You're wonderful. You deserve those. Those are your documents. So sense of entitlement. Not that I was picking on any particular person there. Number 7, interpersonal relationships are exploitative. So tied with the lack of empathy, you don't feel any qualms about using people for your own needs because, hey, if you're that much better, that much more wonderful, what are other people on earth for? They're to be used. Everyone's using anyone else, using other people anyway, so you might as well do it since you're probably better at it and smarter at it. Your success is more important to the world than their success. Number 8 is envying others. So anyone who may be getting more admiration or more recognition, or maybe even seems to have accomplished more or be more beautiful, envying excessively others who you might think are your peers or threatening your uniqueness as a feature. And also imagining that others are envying you all the time because you're so great. Other people must be spending time thinking and admiring and plotting against you because they are jealous of your success and wonderfulness. And number 9 is expressing arrogant or haughty behavior, expressing that you think you are above other people. Some people have said that the personality disorders our descriptions are based on behavior. So it's pretty easy to objectively identify whether someone is a narcissist or not. And unlike the situation with ADHD, where our definitions are written in terms of objective behaviors, does someone interrupt people more than others? We can measure how often they're interrupting. We can measure how others of their similar gender, rank, status interrupt others and see if they're fitting in with their norm or not. All of these personality disorder descriptions, yes, they mention behaviors, but underlying the behavior is a motivation that is linked with it. So lack of empathy, not caring for others. You have to know what is inside the individual. Because I'll get to it in a few minutes. Behavior might be not treating the other person as if they're there, but if it's coming from ADHD, if you're oblivious to them, if you're not paying attention, if you actually physically, literally step on someone's toes, which people with ADHD do more than other people, if that's happening because you're oblivious, because you're not aware, because you are not attentive to it, that is a different situation than if you lack empathy. So if you step on their toes and are feeling really bad about it and apologetic and explain that you didn't see it, that's actually demonstrating that you have empathy, even though you did something that hurt someone else. So a really important aspect here, and I think it's getting lost in much of society, we're losing important, not just nuances, but the essence of the condition we're describing. And one of my other favorite examples is gaslighting, not a technical psychological psychiatric term, but gaslighting doesn't just mean that you are feeling manipulated and you are feeling specifically not just manipulated, someone's trying to make you feel crazy. Gaslighting requires that the person doing it is trying to do that. So, for example, if they are just completely psychotic themselves and think there are little green lizard people stalking you on the sidewalk and aren't behind you, and they're trying to get you to believe that, and they genuinely believe that, that's not gaslighting you. They're not trying to make you feel crazy. They're trying to help you enter their version of reality. Or a political party where they themselves have been lied to repeatedly and fed stories that, let's say, that the Democrats are all pedophile cannibals who have exploiting little children in the basements of their pizza parlors, even in pizza parlors that don't have basements, if you are repeating that and trying to get people to believe it, but you believe it yourself, again, you may not be psychotic by full psychotic definitions, but if you believe it yourself, you're not gaslighting someone. You are just misinformed, trying to get others to join them in your misinformation. So again, narcissistic personality disorder, not only do these behaviors have to hurt others or come across as crass, insensitive, not caring for the feelings of others, but they have to be stemming from the person not caring about what's going on for others. So jumping more thoroughly into the ADHD narcissism connection, rates of narcissistic personality disorder are about 10 to 25 times higher in the ADHD community than in the general population at large. Studies vary, but all of them indicate a high increased incidence. And one of the bases for this is probably there's something called positive illusory bias, which at least a third of boys with ADHD, it's been less extensively both studied and found in girls with ADHD, partly because we have studied girls with ADHD less. So positive illusory bias, and I do have a separate talk on that in this video sequence. So positive, you overrate your abilities. All kids overrate their abilities. All kids over-exaggerate. All kids, say, my dad's 6 feet tall, even if he's a shrimp. Tower 72 feet tall in my basement with Legos. It's way bigger than you do. All kids exaggerate. Kids with positive illusory bias over-exaggerate even more than normal kids. So it's overly positive. Illusory means false. It's not tied to reality. It is an exaggeration. It isn't accurate perception of their abilities. And bias means that it's a consistent trend. It isn't just one or two things. Interestingly, with positive illusory bias, although it's not just with one thing, it's the overestimation is with the kid's own abilities or own grandiosity, as it were. They don't think other kids are faster. They don't overrate other things. So it's not that they're overly optimistic and just blindly, again, with ADHD inattentive, overrating everything. It's overrating their own performance, behavior, capabilities. Normally, if someone thinks that they're good at something, their positive, including an overly positive sense of self, motivates them to run faster, work harder. If you think you're the fastest kid in the class, believing that helps you work harder. If little Johnny is catching up on you in the foot race, or Sally's actually ahead of you, you're going to work faster. Kids with positive illusory bias, actually their own inflated self-image does not motivate them to work harder. So that's, again, it differentiates from normal over-optimism. And if they have negative consequences, say they finished in the middle of the pack or even at the end of the foot race, there's, it was because my shoes were too tight. Wind was blowing, so Bruce and Jenny could run faster than me. Negative experiences do not feed back to help them reassess more accurately. So there has been some studies suggesting that there is a close overlap with positive illusory bias and narcissism, and particularly some of the findings are that with negative feedback, kids aren't learning, and actually that seems to increase symptoms of positive illusory bias. If you say, Greg, you certainly did a good job on that math test. You must be pretty good at math. Greg's assessment of how he does at math actually goes up a little bit. If you praise kids with positive illusory bias, actually their overinflated evaluation themselves drops a little. And this is particularly on social realms, maybe less so in some of the behavioral realms. So it's as if what seems, getting back to more psychological development, the thought is that people with narcissism have a very negative view of themselves, and to protect themselves from that scary feeling of being inadequate, annihilated, not welcomed into their own tribe, they create this presentation to the world that I'm so great, I'm so wonderful, I'm not some little helpless shrimp. I'm not going to be kicked out or evicted from my tribe. Kids who outgrow their ADHD, and we know maybe about a third of kids outgrow a substantial part of it, are actually less likely kids who as adults hold on to their ADHD to hold on or to become narcissists. So there seems to be at least some tracking of ADHD, and maybe it's a positive illusory bias together. Another area where I know part of what's going on is what are the ADHD symptoms that could look like narcissism. And I discussed one before, stepping on people's toes. But of the 9 inattentive ADHD diagnostic criteria, several of them could come across to others as looking like narcissism. So 1, making careless mistakes. So if dad forgot to pay the tuition for your soccer club and you're the kid who, dad made a careless mistake, feels to the kid like, you didn't care about me. You didn't value me. You didn't take care of what you should have taken care of as a parent. Careless mistakes, or in a social situation, if you call Joe, hey, Bob, because you're not paying attention, you got the name wrong, Bob's going to think he doesn't really know who I am, even though we've been sitting next to each other in math class for the last 3 years. Careless mistakes, others are going to look like non-caring, insensitive behavior, or can't sustain attention. If you're falling asleep during someone's lecture, people interpret that as not caring about them, not listening to them. Not listening is the third inattentive ADHD symptom that can look like narcissism. Failure to finish. So again, if you're a parent and Joe asked you to help with the, build the volcano for the science project, and, you found 1 or 2 nights the month before and worked on it with him, but then slipped your mind, you just didn't stay on track, you forgot to buy the baking soda and vinegar to make it explode, or at work, if you don't finish your work project and other people's, depending on your performance, so they can do their share, it's going to look like you didn't give a damn. If you're a narcissist, you might not give a damn. But if you are just failing to finish because you went off track and you really care and are embarrassed and horrified by your behavior, you're probably displaying ADHD rather than narcissistic traits. So getting distracted, getting forgetful, 2 more inattentive traits, and both of those can certainly look like narcissism. And jumping over to hyperactive traits, at least 4 or 5 of them. Simple restlessness. If someone's fidgeting, if someone's getting up and walking around while you're giving a presentation at the team meeting, they're going to think, what this jerk doing? People are looking at them instead of my presentation. They're doing this to upstage me. They don't care what's going on with me when I should be the center of things right now. So just physical restlessness of ADHD can look like narcissism. Talking excessively. Again, people with ADHD tend to, particularly if they're motivated, interested, just race ahead with the topic and maybe talking 6 minutes before giving anyone else a chance to speak. That can look highly selfish. And again, it could be both narcissism and ADHD, but could be purely ADHD going on. Can't wait your turn. So if you cut in front of people in line, that's certainly going to look like entitlement. It's certainly going to look like you're arrogant and haughty. Interrupting others, intruding on others, again, that intruding on their physical space, the stepping on their toes, spewing out what's at the top of your mind, looks highly self-centered and focused on yourself and ignoring the needs of others. It may be deriving from that, but it could also be more purely an impulsive, inattentive ADHD symptom. So again, what's hard to do is knowing the motivation for what's contributing to behavior. And I would say in our modern society, so why would people have a greater tendency to interpret behavior as narcissism and ADHD? All of the symptoms of ADHD are normal behaviors. Everyone interrupts occasionally. Everyone fidgets a little. Everyone fails to finish some tasks or makes some careless mistakes. Some people much fewer than others. But all of the ADHD symptoms are within the range of normal behavior. It's the frequency, intensity, and maybe the context which some of those are happening. On the other hand, by definition, narcissistic behavior is beyond the pale. It's someone who is cutting you off and saying, I don't give a F what you're thinking about this. George Santos, I graduated from this program and I was a star of the volleyball team and all these other ridiculous lies, which are true. So part of narcissism is over the top. All of ADHD is mundane, everyday behavior. We're much more drawn to the more dramatic, ridiculous, excessive patterns. We also like narrative stories. And if we are narrating, we are a character in them. If something's happening, Bobby stepped on my toes just because he's oblivious to me, I'm not really part of the story. I'm part of the background. Might as well be the wall or the cabinet he tripped into or something else. If we cast it as a narcissistic story, it's, oh, Bobby stepped on my toes because he was angry that I beat him in the running race. Oh, Bobby's stepped on my toes because he knows I'm running for class president. He wanted me to look stupid because he's running for class president. And again, I think we often think in narratives to compose narcissistic narrative about others than a simple ADHD narrative. Because again, we are included in part of the narrative. And that gets to my third point. Part of the increase in attributing all sorts of narcissism to others has to do with our own increase in narcissism in our own society. There are undeniably leaders in our political realm, in work realm, certainly parents. There are some parents who were and are horrendous narcissists, engaged in horrendous neglect, abuse of kids. But all parents are going to be less than perfect. And yet much of today's society is encouraging the helicopter mom or dad that you should be attentive to every whim of your kid. You should be protecting them from all the bad that's going on. Again, just the heightened fear that kids are going to get kidnapped. And it happens absolutely horrible, tragic. But there is a mismatch between our reality and our worries and concerns about it. And again, some of that is a narcissistic, I'm vulnerable, I'm threatened stance. So some of the attribution of narcissism to others, I think, is coming from narcissistic issues and not necessarily full-blown narcissism. So that's about all I'm going to say. I will see you next week.